Would you like to introduce us?
What, sorry?
Would you like to introduce us?
We'll just go through like I'll do the intro and
Yeah,
then
cool.
yeah. Okay. All right. So hello everyone. Welcome to Life in Motion. We are interns at the University of Illinois, hoping to help early career professionals navigate the workplace with confidence. My name is Nora.
And my name is Haroon, and we're glad that you guys are tuning in for our conversation today because today we have a special guest joining us. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, I'm Ang Onorato, and I'm very excited to be here and talk about some things that are going to be really important to your mission and to people that are tuning in as well.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. So, welcome to Life in Motion. We just want to know a little bit about yourself and your background and professional sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start, I have been in the executive recruitment, talent acquisition, executive coaching, leadership development space for probably way too many decades at this point. But I call it, I fell into this beautiful industry because really when I was an undergrad, my plan was to continue on and get my PhD and be a clinical therapist, clinical psychologist, actually. And my goal with that wasn't necessarily just to hang my own shingle and see individual patients. I always had the vision of what I say, kind of being up on stage and like healing the masses, as I say. I wanted to kind of be Oprah's really next Dr. Phil. That's really how I thought that I would land. But similar to what you all are doing, I had moved from kind of just basic jobs in rest of undergrad and my going into my senior year um, through a beautiful sequence of events. I landed, which wasn't officially an intern, but I ended up kind of having a part-time job in a really amazing company. And from there, I just really launched my career into the talent side and the human side of that. So fast forward many, many years, and I've worked for global executive search firms. I own my own business as a consulting firm where we do leadership and development and executive coaching. And that's why today I call myself kind of a corporate hippie because I really blend psychology with spiritual intelligence and business acumen together. So I think a lot of things that we'll talk about today, while it's really relevant to, tactical and even strategic things around career development or kind of launching or how to become, a great leader, I think what is often missed and hasn't really been given a lot of attention over the years is that middle part, which I call spiritual intelligence, but it's really just anything that helps you go inward, understand yourself, strengthen and embody your self leadership to create what I really call your leadership voice. And that's not your elevator pitch, it's not your value prop. It's a whole different thing that I call your leadership voice. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a minute. But that's kind of how I got kind of combined all the different things I do in my background and what leads me to talk to every from CEOs to corporations and really to my favorite thing, quite frankly, is working with people like you all. I've done a lot of work with the University Career Services as well and kind of help prepare people, I think a little bit differently to kind of hit the big time, as we say, right? Where you're kind of getting out there and into the real world. And what does that really mean, the real world? How do you navigate that? So that's kind of me and happy to chat a little bit further.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourself. It's always like interesting to learn about our guests and just their background and how their different like career paths have led them to where they are today. And then also so cool how everything's just like intertwined with each other and is still really like beneficial and you're still using different parts of your career currently. So that's amazing. I know you spoke a little bit about like the whole voice aspect. I feel like that's important to really talk about, especially just like, people being vocal, but then also like a mindset type of thing. So I kind of want to get into just the reality of like setbacks and challenges. So just a lot of people feel like they could be behind in their career, whether it's due to like caregiving, personal struggles, or imposter syndrome. So it can tend to feel like personal at times. So we were just wondering what you recommend people who are in that position do to like shift their mindset to be more positive and not feel like a failure.
Yeah, no, there's a lot in there to unpack. So,
Mhm.
but it's probably the best place to start, right? Because I think every one of us, right? There's not anybody that doesn't have the same experience in with regards to the fact that we're all humans behind the work. And no matter what we have to portray externally, there's all kinds of things are going on behind the scenes, so to speak, right? And it really doesn't matter what age or how many years you've been in a career, that life stuff can life us, basically, right? And I think it's a great place to start. So if I'll kind of address the different pieces of it, I think that makes sense, right? And the first part, I think, is tapping into the stressors as well as what you just mentioned, Nora, which is imposter syndrome, right? Because I think starting there, because the way that I see all of this is kind of like, um, I call my company Living Oak Leadership for a reason, and I use the metaphor of a very strong oak tree, right? And how that kind of spawns an acorn that kind of starts their journey. But if you take a cross section of any tree, right, you'll see all the growth rings inside the tree. On the outside, what you see is strong, powerful, success, thriving, surviving, is what most of us are probably really doing, just surviving. But when you look at that cross section, you see all those growth rings. It tells an individual story of that tree, what it experienced, droughts, times of too much sun, snow, whatever it was, it affected how that tree grew. And then how it affected the next seed that it became an acorn, right? So if you think about that first, then I use that same approach when we think about the stressors that we have internally, because a lot of them don't just come from the moment of external things. A lot of it comes from three different things, as far as I'm concerned. It comes from what we generationally inherit. And I don't mean our color of our eyes or our DNA. I mean, what kinds of unprocessed or unspoken or unaddressed things happen that literally get inside of us from the moment that we're born, right? So we carry that with us. We start out kind of behind the eight ball, so to speak. Then we layer in things like, how did we perceive the world as we were growing up, right? It doesn't have to be good or bad things. It's just, what is the small mind, and as we're learning language and learning how to articulate the world, we see things a certain way, and that creates a certain set of beliefs for us. And the third part is obviously our own lived experiences. What things did we experience, right? So when you combine all of those things together, that becomes the stories and the beliefs in our minds. And so whatever story and mindset that we're living in, that can really enhance the amount of stress that we have, or the way that we show up, the triggers that we have, the responses to the things that happen to us. And if you take that, so that's just already inside each one of us. Now we step out the door, we go into the real world, and now we're barraged by social media and expectations and school and finances and caregiving and, society's everything. It's a wonder that any of us kind of really can get up every day and, brush it all off and just kind of keep thriving. So when we start there with all of the things and creating that awareness of what I just mentioned. So the first part for me is what I refer to as your self-leadership. It's being able to understand those influences, understand how they affect the way that we show up. And sometimes when we understand that, then it gives us a better roadmap on how do we go and address some of those things. Because when we can address certain things, we can then get ahead of that curve, and we can start removing or not letting certain stressors even in, right? The second part of that process, and understanding and enhancing and really creating that level of self-leadership, is our old friend, imposter syndrome, right? Again, we all have that in some form or fashion. It just manifests differently in different people, right? So sometimes we might see it in workaholics, we might see it in perfectionists, we might see it in narcissists, we might see it in all all of the whatever. But the simple way I like to coach, my clients through overcoming imposter syndrome is understanding what the thing is. Some people say it's public speaking, or it's I'm this, or I'm not really good enough for that, or whatever. The thing that feels like the biggest imposter for us, that piece, and instead of running from it, which we all do, is to say that is the thing that needs the most attention from me. That's the thing that needs the most love from me about myself. And so the action that I say to get over that is to take the thing that we're imposters of and become an expert at that thing, right? So if it's public speaking, then is awful, and that pit feeling in your stomach that we have, say, go sign up for every public speaking class that you can possibly do, because when you become an expert at that thing, then not only do you get good at that and you build the confidence in it, what it does is it silences that stories we have in our mind. Because when we're so confident in stuff, then we can't feel like we're an imposter because we know we're doing it, right? We know we have that ability. And then the third thing that I really think to address that is the mindset piece. And I think often we get this good advice of change your mindset, change your life, but very rarely do we get informed in terms of how to do that, right? I've always felt it's a little bit of hollow advice without, all right, I'm going through all kinds of stuff. I'm stressed. I haven't slept well. I have exams or I'm looking for a new job and I've got to care for someone in my family. I don't have enough energy even to do this, but I'm supposed to get up every day and figure it out, right? Or look in a mirror and say, today I'm going to have a great day, or today I'm changing my mindset. So when I'm also working with my clients, I kind of walk them through what I call a reverse engineered mindset. So what I mean by that is being very mindful first of the words that we use to describe ourselves or a situation. Sometimes it's just the phrase that we say. And because when we speak them externally, then we also hear them. Our minds hear it back. And then that becomes a story that we tell ourselves, another story. When we create that story in our mind, then it becomes the actions that we do or don't do. And then when those actions that we do or don't do become how we feel about that for ourselves. And then how we feel about ourselves is actually the mindset that we wake up in every day, right? So a quick example of that, if I say, I'm failing at, or no one's ever going to hire me, for example, right? Because I'm not good compared to everybody else. That phrase becomes the mindset or the story in our mind that I should have went to a better school. I wasn't on Dean's list. I'm a failure, right? That story then becomes the action or the non-action, which is the non-action in many cases could be, I'm not even going to apply to that job, right? Then that becomes a feeling of, I just feel like such dismal outlook for myself. I wasted this money going to school. Why did I bother? That's the mindset you're going to wake up in every day, right? And if we switch that and just say, I might have not have been valedictorian, but I am the best at what I do for me. And that becomes the story of I'm excited to go out into the world and showcase my stuff. Becomes the action of I'm going to apply, I'm going to get some coaching, I'm going to do whatever. Becomes the feeling of I'm excited, I'm ready to start my journey. That's the mindset. Then you show up every day, right? So it's those three things. It's the understanding, becoming aware of what makes us up inside. How do we turn that into self-leadership? And then how do we take that and create the right mindset for how we go forward and not let in all of the external stuff? So I know that's a lot, but I hope that kind of
Oh yeah,
landed.
that was great. I definitely think like the first step is to be aware of what's going on, assess the situation, and then further make steps on like how to be better. I resonated with just like what you said, just in general about mindsets. I even try like definitely it's hard when like we're in a very hard like school environment to stay in a good headspace and a positive mindset because especially because it's not super uncommon to like fail exams here and stuff like that. So it definitely could make you feel like a failure. But definitely, even just in terms of mindset, like trying to wake up in the morning and like wake up with a strong mindset, because even like the little things like staying glued to your phone in the morning, like that's stuff that like I've tried to implement in my life. It definitely is like really hard. But definitely, it just helps to like have a better mindset to then just be not only more productive, but just like healthier in general. But
Sure.
yeah, I wanted to also ask, I know that you were like talking about like the public speaking thing in general, just like people lacking some like confidence. So I was wondering, like for somebody who is struggling with like confidence, even in general or just like in a workplace, how can they start like using their voice or like advocating for themselves or like acting on being more confident?
No, and that's a great question. So I think I'll answer that. I'll start kind of through the lens, the professional lens, and then how that kind of comes in there, right? So I think what I do is I teach and coach people based on a simple formula that clarity breeds confidence, number one, right? And so the more clear we can get about certain things, then confidence isn't something we have to think about. It just kind of it comes out of us. And it comes out of us because we can get ourselves into a position where we feel, I call it like a sense of knowing, right? So if we're confident in something, you don't have to think about it. The stories can't come in your mind because you've got total clarity on the fact that you have this thing or you know this thing or you can speak adequately about yourself. So then the question becomes, well, where do we get the clarity from? And this is where it ties in, I think, into the mindset thing we just talked about. So the other approach I think of is getting yourself into a place where I call certainty before logic. And what I mean by that is saying it's really easy to look at the facts or what we know we have to do or should be doing, or how do I show up in this new job? And I've got this whole job description and I've got all these things coming at me. I have to do, I should do, I need to do, right? And that can trigger all the other things we just talked about. But if we can instead look at all of that and say, with a growing sense of certainty that says things like, I may not know everything right now, but I know me, and I'm certain that I will do everything I need to do. I will dive in. I will be open to learn. I will be open to coaching. I will be open to not being afraid to use my voice when I need to ask clarifying questions, whatever it might be. The reason why I say that certainty over logic is like when you start there and say, I'm certain that I know me.
Mhm.
I'm unique in what I do. I don't, doesn't mean I'm everything to everybody. But because of that, when you can start out that new job or this new thing in that level and say that's over the logic of what needs to get done, because that part will just automatically get done when I'm certain I know how I will put the right energy, I will put the right focus into it. Because certainty we can control, all the things into the logic side of things we often can't control. So the key is focusing on what you can control, and that's just being certain of what you're accountable for, right? So as you can do that, that builds clarity of like, okay, I know every day what I'm supposed to be doing when I walk in the door at this place. It doesn't mean I know everything. It means I know what I'm supposed to be doing and what I bring for myself to do that. When you can get clarity like that, then the confidence just emerges, right? In my experience, I think, and there's great books and there's all kinds of tools and influencers, and there's all things are all important and they're all part of it. But I am not a big believer through my own experience and my own journey of going through a lot of things and why I speak the way I do, is that I don't think confidence is one of those things you can just say to yourself, I'm confident. Affirmations, repetitions, doing a lot of things are certainly important tools. But for me, it's about walking through that formula I just mentioned, because then the confidence is just there. It emerges out of you as an energy, right? So I think that's the first part of how can people be most confident. Now, tactically, I think when you're starting your career, and I know most of your listeners are either in or launching their career side of it, the biggest tip I have on that is not thinking about starting your career as a career path. In today's world, we have to think of it as building your career portfolio, right? And that means in the things that generations ahead were looked at like, oh, this person maybe job hopped too much, or they didn't have a clear ladder, right? I mean, we had books and we had years and decades of telling people climb the ladder. Well, climbing the ladder is very rigid, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're building the skills that allow you to be as adaptable, to be as creatively thinking, to be able to not just think out of the box, but how do you bring your own uniqueness into something if you're just following that path? And that might be really contrary advice to a lot of career coaches, but I say this based on many, many years of doing this at all levels. And when you build a career portfolio, it allows you on purpose to raise your hand or on your own say, I want to experience that thing. I want to understand more of that so that I can bring that in to what is your path, what is your passion, what is your function that you like to do. When I mentioned at the beginning of the call, and I say I blend psychology, spiritual intelligence, and business, that evolved over time. When I look back on that now, I'm very lucky that happened. But I would tell anybody starting out, think of your career in that way, because the more that you blend different elements, guess what else happens? It increases your confidence, because we're not just trying to do one thing one way that everybody tells us to do. We're opening up that aperture, and you're bringing it all in. You're creating your portfolio of unique experiences that blend in your own way. And when you can get that blend, then you're creating your own leadership voice. And you don't have to wait to be the VP level to say, I'm a leader now. right? We're leaders at every stage in life, at every day that you wake up. So again, I know it's a lot, and I kind of think in formulas, but in my experience in building this over 30 years, that's really where I think all the pieces fit together. It's like the different puzzle pieces you have to put in there. And my mentor always says, you can't see picture when you're in the frame. So stepping outside of that, building that portfolio and then putting the different puzzle pieces together, then you've got the autonomy to create that frame for you. Then you'll learn how to convey your story, your leadership voice to people in a career sense. And then they understand everything that you can bring to what you do. And it helps you showcase the value of the impact that you can make. The last thing I'll say on this is that, yes, when you're just starting out, a lot of people might say, well, I don't want to have that approach. I don't really know what I don't know yet. I'm in the learning mode. You can absolutely be the biggest sponge ever and still have that approach, right? In fact, the more you do that, I think the bigger your portfolio is, the greater the blend of skills, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm really interested on this idea of a career portfolio rather than like just a straight career ladder and a like a basic plan that's worked before. I think the workforce is shifting a lot now, and it's a lot more dynamic than it used to be. But that actually raised another question for me because many professionals and other like students that I know, we do have like non-linear career paths. It's kind of all over the place. We don't have maybe the traditional experience compared to like generations beforehand. And sometimes I feel like we don't recognize the value of those things that aren't as traditional. Um, and I was gonna ask you, like, how would you have any tips for like recognizing the value of those things that aren't as traditional and how we can like articulate that value and make sense of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an amazing insight, Haroon. And I think a great example of that, right, is that you said the world is very different and the future of work is very different, right? So there's as many very seasoned executives that have what we now call side hustles as you do younger folks, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not always about the economics of it. It's about being able to do something that they love and how they tie that in. And so I think your generation's grown up with this, right? We see how the pace of things and how you can do different ventures and you can do different skills development and you can do things that are resonant with your interest and whatever. But I think being mindful of that and saying, I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years since high school, didn't really think it was important, but when I think about, hey, what elements inside that thing that I do has it developed me in other ways? Has it made me a more critical thinker? Has it made me be able to look at scenarios from various different lenses and find different solutions to things than if I was just following that path? And so, yeah, I think a lot of people undervalue, even in themselves, how those things do play an important part. And actually, that's one of the things that also gets in our minds that becomes imposter syndrome, right? Because we think we're supposed to be going this direction and we're not accounting for those other things that we do or skills or interest or things that we've experienced, and we're not accounting for that. So when we broaden that spectrum and you bring that into a full portfolio, it's like, well, how could you be feeling like an imposter when this is what makes you unique, right? So I think the tip is really not allowing the pressures of saying it's got to just be this. I just have to talk about that. Now, you don't want to go into a job interview and talk about things that are not related or inappropriate, of course, but you could think about that in the preparation, say, what other things have I learned? What have I developed? What is giving me a level of confidence in other things? Because when you include that into everything, now you're chipping away the things that make you feel less confident or less valuable, right? And so I think that it's a very important thing. And when we can shift your mindset to think that way, then when you get into that role, I think it's also very important, though, as you're interfacing with workers or employees or leaders of other generations ahead of you, there's always, from the beginning of time, there's always been conflict between, the next generation, right? But instead, when you've got that grounding and you've got the full scope of what that is for you, then when you're interfacing with other generation and leaders, is asking them, what worked for you? If you could go back and talk to your 25-year-old self when you're starting out, What would you do differently? How would you say that? Here's how I'm doing it. I'm interested in how you could, and your thoughts or insights on that, right? And so it lets you start with where you are and create really powerful relationships with those that come ahead of you and avoid any of that potential conflict of like, they're not going to think I have enough experience to do the thing, right? It helps you bring more of you in there at whatever life stage or career stage, that you're at.
Well, thank you.
Hmm.
Yeah, also just I feel like another important thing to talk about is just then when you're in the workplace, like feeling supported and feeling just like you're in the right place. I feel like when your environment is all set to align with just like your mindset and just be like as a positive space for you, you're more likely to be more productive in that space and your mindset is more likely to be like stronger and more positive. So I was just wondering like for somebody who is in a work environment where they don't feel as supported and it might be like more so maybe even like in a more negative environment, like what is one way that they can, I guess, like advocate for themselves or any advice that you would give for people in terms of like just workplace environment or finding like the best fit for them?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question right now. There are unfortunately more toxic work environments right now than I still care to, think about. I hear it with my clients every single day. And by the way, even at the C-suite, it starts with people being put in toxic situations at that level. And so, yeah, when you're just starting your career, that filtering down can be very powerful, right? And so the first thing I'd say is really taking into account everything we just spoke about, all elements of that, getting really clear, build that self leadership and confidence in yourself, because when you can do that, it allows you then to be able to pull back at a more macro level when you see some of the toxic things that might be happening. And when you're very new in your career, it's hard not to really absorb all of that and think, oh my gosh, it's directed at me, it's happening to me, I'm letting it into me. It's really important to build that foundation that we just talked about, because that's going to help you look externally and say, how do I separate what is toxicity that's outside of me and what am I not letting in? First and foremost, right? Because at any level, we're allowed to not let any toxicity into us and affect us on a personal level. When you can do that and you can see, well, what areas make this really toxic? What is it about? Is it a person? Is it a culture? Is it a process? Is it an expectation? Like what actually is when we pull back and we can look at it for what it is, we don't let it in, that helps you solution and problem solve a little bit differently. So in that case, if you say, well, instead of just throwing in my resignation, I'm leaving, able to look at it and say, is it a process that may not be set up effectively for success for younger junior student or junior employees? If that's the case. That might be a wonderful opportunity for you to start a very different kind of dialogue with leadership to say, you might not be aware, this is a process that's been in place for a very long time, totally understand it. I'm curious how open you might be for us to exploring another way to do this thing,
Mhm.
as an example, right? And now that leadership then gets to experience you with your leadership on how you solution, how you communicate, but you're not letting it affect you personally. And you mentioned without that ability to do that, when that worker now goes home, if they're not able to do that, and then they have to deal with caregiving stresses and everything else, coming to work tomorrow and the next day and the next day is just a snowball, effect that's does nobody any good, because the next job is the grass won't be greener. It's not going to solve itself. So I think the biggest thing is learning to do the self first and then identifying externally what's happening, but not letting it in, looking at it as just one more good opportunity and a way for, you to find a way to be part of the solution for that.
Yeah, cool. I had that's really interesting. And I have like one final question regarding I think like a summary of everything you've been talking about so far. One thing that I feel like stands out to me a lot from what you're saying, it feels like clarity is very, very important in like becoming a leader, like being able to address what's wrong and like being able to introspect a little bit and do that. But I feel like nowadays, especially with social media and all the distractions in the world today, like everything's pushing you in a direction to have no clarity and kind of put thoughts into it. They basically, it's very easy to just not think and have thoughts be put into your head for you. If you open up your phone in the morning, for example, just
I
happens
agree.
naturally. So what do you have any like tips that we could apply to our daily lives that we could just kind of garner that uh just awareness?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's such a great thought, and I'll tell you, I think that affects everybody. I mean, I'm a victim of it myself. Look at the phone before bed, look at the first thing before your feet even hit the floor. And it's caused a lot of issues for me personally as well. I think it's impossible for us to, I think, function at the level that we need and want if we allow, and it's not just a distraction anymore. I really do think that everything, it's the energy, it's what's being put out, it's the expectation, the language, whether it's social media, whether it's the media, whether it's divisiveness, whether there's just so much. And it's affecting every one of us on a visceral and a somatic, soma and the body level, right? The first thing that I think is absolutely critical, and I know we all need our phones for communication, all of that, but the few things that I do that I found very, very helpful is, sounds kind of weird, but like maybe for little kids, but setting timers on the phone, number one, and saying like I'm shutting it off. It's a 1 hour day of social media broken up throughout the day. That doesn't mean sit down for 1 hour and do it, right? But being
Yeah.
really diligent about that. The other part is um, I have learned to go more and more with my do not disturb button on the phone. So I can still see urgent, important things that come up because you can set it, but turning that off, right? I think there's this thing, it's like no matter what we do, it's like it's burning. It's like, I'm not going to look over there. There's a little fire, there's a brush fire going on. I'm not going to look at it. Well, of course we're going to look at it. You can't not. And I think there's the first tactic of physically removing that device or the energy from it, because how can we do everything we just talked about? Exactly to your point, if everyone else's thoughts, ideas, expectations, and I think we're seeing it every day, we are all forced to expel so much energy to just discern what's real and what isn't, what's true and what's not. And I think that this message, which I've built now over 30 years, is more important than ever, because I think the more that we go inward and you get secure there, that's the only real truth that we have. And I don't want to sound so woo-woo, but I am the corporate hippie, so that's kind of, I get to bring that in a little bit. But the truth is, there's no more truth than who we are. So no matter what gets thrown out on the outside, again, it's the same approach. It's like put the phone down, but do it in a way that it's purposeful, right? The second part, I think, is immense for everybody, starting their careers. It's the only way I really option is when I have, and I feel that that phone needs to be there because I've got important things coming in, then I will on purpose only turn on things that are educational. I turn myself into a mobile university, right? So it's only positive podcasts like this. It's only things that teach me something, and that grounds me in a level of a truth, right? Because no matter where we go, we're going to get all the other stuff thrown at us on a billboard or, in a headline somewhere. You can't completely get away from it. And we do want to be informed the best we can. But Herman, it's such a great question, because I think that's the biggest push and pull that we all feel. All the great work we can do on ourselves and our careers can be blown up in a millisecond by a TikTok video or something that comes out. And I feel it's one of our biggest challenges in our entire culture right now is learning how to separate that. And the last thing I'd say, look, I don't think anybody should be exercising 12 hours a day nonstop or doing anything else. But yet we do that with our phones and our data and our technology. And it has to be part of our lives in a way that's additive and not destructive.
Yeah, I think the difference between the two, it's definitely really important to understand and have just like a healthy balance of like everything in your life, and definitely like just different things you want to involve yourself in. Make sure that like it's gonna really like better yourself or just be like a positive experience, like how you mentioned. So thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to close off and ask if you have any like last piece of like advice for any of our listeners about like any setbacks they may like experience and just like how to just grow as an individual and career wise. So if you have any
Yeah.
advice.
I think the last thing I would leave you all with is that everything that I think we just chatted about today, and I see this even with my very seasoned leaders, is that what we're talking about, first and foremost, is a complete and total paradigm shift from the way that we've grown up, the way that we're conditioned, the way that we think, the way that people put expectations on us. I refer to it as corporate conditioning in many ways. There's gender, there's society, there's cultural. So everything we're talking about right now and blending all of this is a complete paradigm shift to how most people operate. And it feels probably too big and too heavy. But I think that for the folks that understand that and are willing to kind of do that work, you can have a little bit of all of it. You'll have career success and a pathing based on your portfolio. You'll have a social life and ability with the devices and all of that. You'll have growth, you'll have relationship, you'll have learning, but it will be done in a way that you get to control that narrative. It doesn't get put on you. And so I think the biggest tip is just diving in and thinking self-leadership first before external leadership. And if you can follow that through, then your career is going to go in the direction that you probably can't really conceive at this point.
I agree with that. That's a great piece of advice. Thank you.
Yeah. So, just a closing question. I wanted to know, me and the viewers would actually like to know where we could connect with you more and learn more about you and your work if we like after the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So I try to make it super simple. You can just go to my website. So it's Ang Onorato, which is Onorato.com. You can also find me at that on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn every day. And last tip, if you're not on LinkedIn right now, or you're not prolific, even giving your thought leadership every day, even if you're starting your career, highly, highly recommend that you do that. Get your voice out there. So yeah, I'd love to everybody connect with me on website, LinkedIn, and happy to help and support in any way I can.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think that's a wrap on today's episode. Huge thanks to Miss Ange Honorato for joining us today. And then thank you for everybody on the outside who's listening to this. At any time, if anyone finds it helpful, make sure to follow our Life in Motion podcast to keep up with the different episodes. And also just let your peers, like friends and family, know about our podcast. And hopefully everyone finds the things that we talk about and the conversations useful. So, yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you
Thank
again.
you guys.
All right, bye.